And welcome back to Freight Waves. Now we'll hit our top story as the ILWU in Canada seeing their strike move into a second weekend. And joining us is CNBC senior editor of Guest as well as maritime contributor to Freight Waves, Larocco, joining us here now. Lori, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here. This is obviously a tough situation in the Pacific Northwest. And what can you give us as far as the latest? Obviously, we're going on to leading up to the second full week of this strike.
Exactly. Good morning, guys. So we're in day 10 of the strike. And I reported on Friday, Willie Adams told me, because I've been posing the question, will the West Coast longshoremen for the United States service any of the diverted vessels? And he said no. But the interesting thing here is, and I cannot get an answer, is that we have already had 3 vessels diverted. 2 have already left port and going to other United States ports. We had 1 vessel that did divert from Vancouver heading to the port of Seattle over the weekend, and it is going to be serviced. You and I both know when it comes to trade, because of safety reasons, the ports nor the longshoremen have the bills of lading. And so we are definitely having vessels reassigned to new ports. In fact, my sources have told me pretty much every maritime ocean carrier has done this. And so the sticking points are still the same. But, you can't be fooled by the rhetoric. Yesterday, 2 days ago, the BCMEA came out saying that they were back to the table, discussing with the longshoremen. That's not true. They're physically not at the table talking to each other. They're still going one-on-one with their own mediators. So that really is a telltale sign that they are still far apart. And I did receive that information from government officials. So, you just have to do extra due diligence to see what kind of messaging both sides are trying to put out.
And Lorianne, going off of that, with the status of where these mediations or meetings are going on, what does that really kind of put the timeline at really finding a resolution for all of this?
Well, right now, when it comes to the resolution, there really is no timeline for an ending. When I've been speaking with the labor minister's office, they told me that if government intervention did happen, that's really the only thing that you can bank on for a time frame. And so here's a time frame for something if this happens. It's going to take about 3 days for Parliament to get back into Parliament, because they're not in session right now. Even with the remote vote,
I think we may have lost her there, but obviously a very tough situation in the Pacific Northwest, Anthony. And obviously, they're talking about millions of dollars in freight being diverted. So that's obviously tough there to go to where. Lorianne, we've got you back here now. Looking at go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. So it's going to take about 3 days for Parliament to get back into session, and then you're going to need physical quorum in that building if you do get that quorum. But the government officials do not want to get involved as of right now. It is an election season, so to speak, up there, so they are trying to have this work out. They only stepped in with Montreal because of COVID. You had COVID supplies that were stuck at the port, and that was the only reason I was told that they stepped in. We are having the diversions, and now we have to see what exactly the longshoremen going to do. I did put another email into, Willie Adams' direct point of contact to see, 2 other vessels were serviced, and you said that you weren't going to service them. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming days, but we are not, any further or closer to a resolution here.
Lorianne, when you look at the situation and just the timing of it as well, obviously we had the ILWU and the American side come to an agreement, granted after a little bit of a shaky situation, as you had some workers decide not to show up to work at certain points. That obviously didn't happen north of the border here as well. But with the timing of this as well, especially right now at a quote-unquote time where you're seeing possibly the most freight come into the country at that particular moment. Was that perhaps, again, part of the reason that they decided to strike at this particular moment?
We'll have to see. I mean, I did ask when it comes to the work slowdowns that we saw. here in the United States. I did ask if they do have a return to work. Are they going to stipulate that there will be no slowdowns? I was given a no comment. But I can tell you from a worker standpoint, with the working of the vessels that were diverted, they're going in and out like regular time. So it's not like the longshoremen here in the United States are slowing down when it comes to, the processing of vessels.
And Lorianne, of course, this is a full supply chain. So what are going to be some of the impacts that we're seeing, especially on the rail side, as this starts to really pile up here?
Well, I'm actually going to get some new rail data, hopefully in the next hour or two. So the American Association of Railroads, they release railroad data every Wednesday. Last week when they released their data, you really didn't have the full impact, if you will, of the strike. The data that's coming out on Wednesday will indeed show you that slowdown. And what's fantastic about their data is that it actually breaks it down in terms of what is coming in. We've had a lot of people calling this weekend in terms of the economic impact, if you will. In terms of the amount of trade that flows every day, you've had on the Canadian side, they said the walkout has impacted $374 million of trade a day. And so we're in our 10th day. So it doesn't take, that much of a rocket scientist to figure out the amount of trade that is being impacted.
As you have covered this story and obviously all the ripples and the effects of this coming down the supply chain, have you gotten any sense of, and again, if they're not at the negotiating table, any sense of panic or any sense of, hey, we need to get this fixed as soon as possible? Or are people still saying, you know what, we might still have a chance of getting something here. We can remain calm and get through this?
The biggest challenge, I spoke to the American Apparel and Footwear Association this morning, and they told me that the strike is definitely affecting, especially those who are in e-commerce. He said the interesting thing was, it's in terms of the challenge now is where are you going to get your goods that are stuck on those vessels? And I've been checking the vessels at port over in Vancouver. There are at least 10 there that have not moved. So what are you going to do with those, containers that are stuck there? And more importantly, if you are able to divert your containers, there are extra costs involved. And so I already have the National Retail Federation saying that this is going to impact inflation. You have the AAFA also saying that it's going to impact inflation. The Canadian government is also warning about inflation. And so you and I both know, based on what happened with COVID, there are lingering effects with these strikes. These strikes you can pretty much equate now to the slowdown that we saw with COVID. And so when you look at the inflationary pressures based on the flow of trade with the history, you're going to be seeing an inflationary impact come this fall. And that's a time when, you or I are going to be holiday shopping and things like that. But everybody is saying now, because we're in our 10th day, this is indeed affecting the supply chain, both for Canada and here in the United States.
Definitely some more headwinds mounting into the second half of the year. Lorianne, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we'll also be following up with you as the story develops.
Thanks for having me.